Okay, so today we're going to solve equations by undoing. One of the key things we're going to need to know is, when do we solve by undoing? We want to solve by undoing. Why is this not right? There it goes. We want to solve by undoing when there's one x in the math problem. So, when there's one x in the math problem, we'll solve by undoing. So given this equation, y equals 3 times x minus 8 squared plus 2, find y when x equals 3, when x equals negative 1, when x equals 0. All right, so we need to put in x values. Put in x value, put in an x value. That's really not solving at all. That's going to be evaluating. Okay, and we can evaluate by using our graphing calculator. If you remember from previously when we used our graphing calculator, the button that will help us out, get that a little thicker so we can read it better. The button that will help us out is the trace button on our calculator. Okay, on a Casio, the trace button is the F1 button. Alrighty, so what we need to do is we need to turn on our graphing calculators, and we need to go to our y equals, and we need to type 3 parentheses x minus 8 parentheses squared plus 2, and draw the graph. Then, as long as x equals 3 is in our screen, we can just type trace or F1, 3, enter, and it'll tell us that y is 77. Okay, right after that, if we do negative 1, it'll still be tracing for us, and it'll tell us that y is 245. And right after that, if it's still tracing, we can type 0, enter, and it'll tell us that y is 194. And again, my pen stops writing. Let's try that again. Y equals 190, nope, 94. Oh well, it's just going to be one of those days. All right, given y equals the same equation, find x. Find x when y equals 11. So now the scenario has changed. We need to put 11 in for y. So we'll get 11 equals 3 times x minus 8 squared plus 2. And the name of the game is undoing. We're going to work backwards through the steps of PEMDAS, the order of operations. So first we'll undo adding or subtracting. So this 2 over here, we're going to subtract. So we'll have 9 equals 3 times x minus 8 squared. Next we get to the multiply or divide part. And hey, here's a multiplied by 3. So undoing, we're going to divide by 3. Remember, what you do to one side, you do to both sides. So we're down to 3 equals x minus 8 squared. So now we're going to undo the e for exponent. To undo a square, we square root. Square and square root cancel each other off. And so we'll have x minus 8 equals the square root of 3. Now here is something you may not remember from Algebra 1. The square root of 3 is technically two numbers, because it might be a positive times a positive equals a positive, or it might be a negative times a negative equals a positive. So in front of every square root we create, we're going to put plus and minus. So we remember it's two numbers. Okay, continuing to work backwards. Now we're at P for parentheses. So inside what used to be the parentheses, we had x minus 8. And now we're ready to move that 8. So we're going to add 8. Add 8 to both sides. And we'll have x equals. Well, that was two different numbers, remember? That was a positive square root of 3, and that was a negative square root of 3. So I'm actually going to get 2x equals. I'm going to get 8 plus the square root of 3, and I'm going to get 8 minus the square root of 3. And I'll type both of those into my calculator to figure out what they are. 8 plus square root of 3 is 9.732. And 8 minus the square root of 3 is 6.268. So 2x values when y equals 11. All right, let's try another one. All right, so given y equals 3 times x minus 8 squared plus 2, find x when y equals 36. So that 36 needs to go in for y. Remember, we're undoing, so we're doing PEMDAS in reverse. So we'll start with adding or subtracting, which is subtracting. What we do to the right, we have to do to the left. So 34 equals 3 times x minus 8 squared. Okay. So now we are multiplying or dividing. In this case, we're undoing multiplying, so dividing. All right, 34 divided by 3, that's not a pretty number. 11.3 repeating. If we write it as a decimal, I'll say 333 equals x minus 8 squared. So now the next thing we can do is undo the squaring with square root. And that crosses off the square. And whenever we put a square root on our paper, we want to put a plus and a minus in front of it, remembering we don't know if that's positive times positive or negative times negative becoming positive. Since it's a number times itself, it could be either one of those situations. So we're going to have x minus 8 equals the square root of 11.333. And then to get x by itself, we'll add that 8. So we're going to get x equals 8 plus the square root of 11.333. And we're going to get 8 minus the square root of 11.333. And then you grab your calculator and type it in. There's no advantage to putting the square root in sooner, so I just don't bother. Okay, 8 minus the square root of 11.333, 634, I'm sorry. Alrighty. Let's try one more. What about if it's in function notation? Remember that when it's in parentheses, it's been a while since we've seen this, that number in parentheses is the input. So that's your x value. And when you know your x values, you want to use your graphing calculator and use trace or F1 if you have a Casio. So we go to our calculator, y equals menu, and type in our equation, draw it, and then use F1 or trace to enter. So equals 6.5. The output is 6.5. And if you've still pressed trace, you don't even have to press it again. Just press 0, enter, and y equals negative 1.5. The output of the function is negative 1.5. You will not be expected to show work when entering x values. Please use your calculator to increase your accuracy. There's plenty of work to show when you need to put in a y value. So remember, if f of x is equal to 12, then f of x should become 12. I should be able to just plug that in. So 12 equals 1/2 times x plus 3 squared, subtract 6. Okay, undoing. So we're adding 6, we get 18. All right, here's a tricky one for us. Dividing by 1/2. Dividing by half is actually the same as multiplying by the reciprocal. So multiplying by 2. So 36 equals 2 times 1/2 is 1. So that's gone away. We have x plus 3 squared. Okay, so now we square root. When you square root, remember to put plus or minus in the front. Now this case, I'm going to actually do that because I, in my brain, know the square root of 36 is 6. So I'm going to say plus or minus 6 equals x plus 3. And now to get x alone, I'm going to subtract 3. So x will equal negative 3 plus 6, and x will equal negative 3 minus 6. So negative 3 plus 6 is 3. Negative 3 minus 6 is negative 9. 2 x answers for each problem. Okay, hope that helps.